my name is Michael McCann, and welcome to this tutorial on animating raindrops on glass. I'm going to start by adding a plane and rotating it on X 90 degrees, and then scaling it on X. And then I'm going to add a few loop cuts so that when I subdivide it, it's into even squares. So I'll subdivide and then change the number of cuts to 40. And while I'm in edit mode, I'm just going to hit U and unwrap. And adding all that extra geometry will help later when I do the weight painting. So now I'm going to switch over to Cycles Render. And I'm going to hit Shift A and add an image as a plane, which is an add-on. If you don't have that enabled, you should. It's very useful. And I'm going to find this image of a city. And under my material settings, I'm going to make it an emission. Now I'm going to rotate this on X and then move it out in front of our window. Now I'm going to add another image as a plane. And this one will be of the inside of a cafe, because our window is going to be two things. It's going to be glossy so that it shows the reflection of the city in front of it, but also transparent so that it shows through into the cafe behind it. With the window selected, I'm going to give it a glossy material. And I'm just going to sort of scale and position these planes so that they're aligned in the camera view. And also, when you add an image as a plane and choose the emission material, you get this light path node that you don't need, so you can delete it. So now I'm mixing the glossy shader with a transparent shader. And so now you can really see that cafe in the back. I want this to be mostly glossy with just a little bit of the image of the cafe coming through. So now I'm going to add a texture to the roughness value on the glossy shader. And I'm going to use this rough metal texture. And I'm also going to add a color ramp. And this will give me a little more control. And I'm also going to add an RGB curves node to this because it can tweak the contrast a little and then bring in some of that the lights from that image of the city, which I really like those colors, so I'm going to sort of emphasize them. So now this part of the material is finished, so I'm going to hit Shift A and go to Layout and Add Frame. Because we won't need this anymore, and it's just visually easier for me to keep it separate. But I do want to copy the initial two shaders, those glossy and transparent shaders that are mixed together, because we want another one that isn't affected by that rough metal texture that I used for the first set. And I'm just going to mix those two together. And of course our dynamic paint will be the factor of the two, but when we get there, you'll understand if you don't right now. So now in front orthographic view, I'm just going to hide everything except for my window. And I'm going to add a UV sphere. And this will be the raindrop, of course. So I'm just going to scale it down pretty small and move it to the top of the window. And then hit I to insert a location keyframe. And I have 350 frames in this animation, so I'll move it all the way down to the end. And then move the sphere all the way to the bottom of the window and insert another location keyframe. And in my graph editor, I'm just going to hit N to bring up my options. and then scroll all the way down to Add Modifier and select Noise. Because I want my raindrop to be, to have a little bit of a zigzaggy motion, but that's a little too turbulent. So I'm just going to adjust the strength down to, I'll just take it all the way down to 0.1. And it looks a little better, but I need to adjust the scaling by taking it way up. And that will sort of smooth out the noise so that it's acting a little more like a drop of water running down the glass. I might even go higher than that. I'll take this scale up to 20 or so. Yeah, that looks better. So now with the sphere selected, I'm going to go to my physics panel and click Dynamic Paint and select Brush. And all these settings are fine, just as they are. And with the window selected, I'm going to go back to Dynamic Paint and select Add Canvas and switch it from Vertex to Image Sequence. And I'm going to double the resolution to 512. And this substeps is really important. If you've ever done Dynamic Paint before and you've noticed that it's sort of spaced apart or jittered or just sort of like a row of polka dots, it's because your substeps were too low. In the Dynamic Paint output, I need to do two things. I need to select the UV map, and also on my desktop I have a folder just labeled Dynamic Paint, and that's where I want all of that image sequence sent to. So with that selected, I'm just going to hit Bake, and you can see there's all of those images. So that's what our Dynamic Paint looks like. And so now we can add that to our material. Now I'll add an image texture and find that folder and just open the first image and then change it from single image to image sequence and check auto refresh and then add the amount of frames, which in this case is 350. Now I'm just going to connect that to the mix factor and also add a color ramp. And as I bring the white back, it'll sort of sharpen up that line. Now I'm going to go back to my Dynamic Paint settings and just add another canvas. Switch this one from Vertex to Image Sequence as well. And this time I'm going to take their resolution even higher to 1024. And the substeps even higher too, so I just changed it to 15. And I want it to dissolve. And I have a different folder on my desktop called Bump Map. And that's going to be what this one is. Also make sure to select that UV map. So now I'm going to bake this. The only real difference between the two dynamic paints, other than the resolution, is that this one sort of fades out and tapers at the end because I selected dissolve, which is important for the effect of the bump map. So I'm going to hit Shift A and add an image texture. Do this the same way as before. Just open it up and select that folder, bump map, and select the first image. Change it from single image to image sequence. Click auto refresh, 350 frames. And also, like before, I'm going to add a color ramp. Then go Shift A vector bump node. And I'm going to plug it into the normal value of the glossy shader. And now I want to plug the color ramp into the height of the bump node. And you can see that's starting to do something, but there's still a lot more to do. I'm going to go to color and add a mix RGB, and then also plug that into the strength. Then hit Shift A and go to texture, noise texture, and I'm just going to give it a mapping node and some texture coordinates. And that too will go into the mix RGB node. And you can adjust the scale to whatever you think looks good. Faster moving raindrops would likely have more noise, so just keep that in mind. I'm going to set the RGB node to subtract, and I'm not sure that it's necessary to plug the alpha value of that color ramp into the factor of the mix RGB node. I did that on my first time around. I can't really remember why, but I don't necessarily see a difference when I unplug it now. But anyway, this color ramp, if you slide the white value back towards the black, you can make that trail, the bump map, longer. So that can sort of be used to increase create the effect that the speed of the raindrop is increasing or slowing down. So it's very useful. So now I'm going to drop these two into a frame on their own, because just like using node groups, you can sort of, like, I like to, like, for instance, I'll label this one bump length, because that's what those nodes do. They increase the length of that bump map. So I'll just label it that. And actually, I'm going to go to my user preferences and change the font color on the nodes to white, and that way it stands out a little more. So now I know that if I come back to this a month later, I'll know that this little section increases the length, and just helps me sort of keep things straight in my head. And I can do the same thing for these three nodes, because this sort of controls, well, it does a couple of things actually, but primarily it controls the scaling of the noise in the bump map. It'll also be used for the animation, but I'll get to that when we're there. Alright, well, I need to do one more thing with the dynamic paint. So I'm going to get out of my render view here for a moment. And in my dynamic paint settings, I'm going to add another canvas and keep it at vertex and change it from paint to weight. And all this looks good. I do want to check fade. And next I'm going to add a particle system of raindrops on the surface of the window. So as this raindrop comes down, it's going to erase those smaller drops. But it's very important that you come down underneath of your dynamic paint output and add this vertex group. And you can see if you go to your vertex group here, you can see that it's been added. So I'm going to go to another layer and add an icosphere. And then in edit mode, I'm going to select half of it and hit scale X0, and then move that edge out just sort of right in front of its origin. And that will keep it from going through the window. So now I can give this some material, and I'm just going to give it a glass material, and then also mix that with some transparency. Now I'll just duplicate this a few times. And with proportional editing, I'm just sort of giving each one a slightly different shape. Also make sure to smooth shade them. Now select them all, and with one of them active, I'm going to hit Control G and make them a group and call this one large drops. Now I'll make another group of small drops, but because these will be much smaller, I'm just going to use a cube, and I'm going to hit W, subdivide smooth, and that sort of rounds it out. And do the same thing, just select the back half and hit scale X0 to flatten it out, and then move it in front of its origin. And then smooth shade this as well. And now I can select that and then select one of the larger drops and hit Control L and link the materials. So now it has the same glass and transparency. I'm only going to create 3 of these because, again, they'll be very small. So I'll change the name of this group to Small Drops. And now with my window selected, I'm just going to give it a new particle system and choose Group and then select Large Drops. Now I'm just adjusting the size and the amount until it looks right. And then very important, under vertex groups, you want to select DP weight, which is that vertex group that we created with the dynamic paint, and we want to select it under length. But right now it's doing the opposite of what we want, so in order to flip it, we just need to hit these little 2 arrows here. And now all of the raindrops are on the window, and the larger drop will erase them as it comes down. And so now I'm going to set up the small drops the exact same way. Now after I finish tweaking the particles, I can start working on some animation. So in order to get that rippling effect behind the raindrop, it's really simple. You just add keyframes into the location on the mapping node that's connected into the noise texture. So if I slide this up, you can see that it's sort of creating waves behind it. Let's give the raindrop itself a quick material. So I'm going to select glass and mix it with a transparent shader. And I'm going to add a gradient texture to use as the factor. And just to see the effect more clearly, I'm going to change the color of these 2 shaders. So you can see how that gradient texture is being applied. I want to flip it so that the glass is on the bottom and the transparency is on the top. So under the Y rotation, I'll choose -90, and then just move it up a little bit on the X-axis, and that sort of brings it there. So now the transparency will sort of blend into that bump map or the trail behind it, and the bottom will have more of like a heavy IOR factor and look like it's a little thicker. And next I'm going to add some shape keys to this raindrop, because as it moves down the window, it would naturally deform a little. So under my shape keys, I'm going to add, and that adds the basis, which is basically the unedited form of the object. And so we need to add another one to add our first key, which I'm going to relabel just deform. And this will be just if the raindrop is just moving down. So in edit mode, I'll just use proportional editing to pull the top up a little. The raindrop itself will probably almost never be completely round as it is, as the sphere is. It'll always have a little bit of deformation in it. So now as it's moving down, it can just do like a little bit of a deform. And I also want to add another one and call this one right. And so this is when the object itself, I suppose from its view, it would be moving left, but from our camera view, it would be moving to the right. So I can just, slant it and make it look like it's moving in sort of that general direction. and then add one more and just label this one left, and just do the very opposite. Just grab the left corner, or our right corner, I suppose. And that should work. And then of course just add those keyframes into the shape keys, as you're animating, and you get this effect. So that's it for this. I hope you guys liked the tutorial, and I'll see you next time.